Well, hi, and welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. I'm Renee Williams, and I'm here with my co-host, Billy Thomas, and we really appreciate that you're joining us today.
Yeah, you made it back. It's the second Wednesday in January 2022, our second show of the year. We've got a really good one lined up today. I'm glad to have you all with us. If you're joining us via Zoom, you can use the chat function and we'll interact with you there. Or if you're on Facebook Live, please use the comment section and we'll respond accordingly. But Renee, three good guests today. We're going to start off with Chad Nyman talking about mass timber buildings. And this is pretty exciting stuff. And Chad's been involved with it for a while, and he's going to be telling us some more information about it. It is a real good opportunity, I think, for forest management to take place if we can use some of this lower quality stuff and get some buildings up made out of wood. And then we're going to follow up with Laurie Thomas on the tree of the week. This is another oak tree. I won't tell you which one, but we do have another oak tree coming up. And then we're going to wrap up today's show with Jacob Muller. Dr. Muller is going to be talking about some of the storm damage resources that we've developed on our website. He's taken the lead for our UK Forestry and Natural Resources Extension team on kind of helping people with the storm damage. So if you've got any questions related to storm damage, woodlands, Jacob's going to be available to help us, and he's going to show some of those resources a little bit later. So a great show. Again, thank you all for being with us today. A pretty day here in Lexington, and we're glad to have you with us.
Still a little cold, but we'll take it. All the snow is pretty much gone. But anyway, so let's get on with our show. So Chad, if you want to get on with us.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Chad.
So tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about today.
So today I'm going to give just kind of a general overview to mass timber, what it is, some of the current standards that exist with mass timber, and some of the work that is going on throughout the country to try to include hardwoods into this mass timber recipe so that we can be able to get forest management achieved in our woodlands that have hardwood species. And so we'll talk a lot more about that in detail.
Sounds great. Let's get started.
Nice to have you with us, buddy.
So the talk is titled Buildings for Community Innovation for the Future. And as I was saying, it's just a general overview of mass timber. This structure you can see on the title slide here is the Forest Science Complex at Oregon State University. And so it's a very warm and aesthetically pleasing building. And you can see that there's plenty of space for windows and good lighting. And so this is a great showcase of the capabilities of mass timber products. Cross-laminated timber, we'll detail what that is in just a moment. So as Billy was saying, this is really important for forest management. And so wood is our oldest and most sustainable building material when it's paired with sustainable forest management. And so with new technology and innovation, mass timber building components are improving the health and sustainability of spaces where we live, work, learn, and recreate. And so we're able to get that forest management accomplished. We're able to have a place for that wood to be used, and we can use it in making wall and ceiling panels that can construct buildings. So what is mass timber? So it's a new category of wood product. And so it's revolutionizing how America builds. It's comprised of multiple solid wood panels, either nailed or glued together, and that allows for an exceptional amount of strength and stability while having lower weight than steel and concrete. And this is just an image of the Mass Timber Design Manual. It's a good reference for folks in the architecture or engineering fields that want to learn more about mass timber design. And it can be downloaded for free at the link that's on the screen. And so anyone could go on there and learn more about mass timber design. It's a great resource. So benefits of mass timber. We've talked a bit about how harvesting these trees can allow for increased forest management, having a market to be able to put that wood into. And that new market allows landowners to be able to sell their trees so they can achieve their management objectives. It can provide income for their property as well. The very important component is the carbon storage through long-lived wood products. And when you compare wood to carbon and steel, it has a much lower carbon footprint in being able to grow that tree and harvest it compared to the extraction of steel and other methods. Steel and concrete will always be important in our construction, but being able to reduce the amount of that that's used in the construction process and use more wood has great benefits. It's also important to note the biophilic properties of wood, the smell, the touch, the way that you feel when you're in a wood building. And wood's insulative properties are also a great asset for being inside of the building and temperature regulation and other important factors with buildings. So just a brief history of mass timber. This is something that is relatively new in the US, but it was introduced in Austria and Germany in the early 1990s. European production picked up in the early 2000s as it started to gain traction. It was introduced to North America in around 2012, and it was quickly codified in the US and Canadian building codes sometime between 2015 and 2016. And so there's a few different types of mass timber. And so the first one we'll talk about is cross-laminated timber. There's an image here on the right that shows how that wood is oriented in those pressed panels. And so it's cross-laminated timber, abbreviated as CLT, is defined by ANSI APA. APA is the American Plywood Association. And in the building code, the International Building Code, PRG 320 standard, as prefabricated engineered wood product, it's made of at least 3 orthogonal layers of graded sawn lumber or structural composite lumber that are laminated by gluing with structural adhesives. A CLT panel, as we mentioned there, consists of several layers of kiln-dried lumber. The boards are stacked in alternating directions. They're bonded with adhesives and pressed to form a solid, straight, rectangular panel. And so these panels, they are an odd number of layers. The most typical are 3 to 7. And so these may be sanded or pre-finished before they are shipped. So looking at the International Building Code standards for cross-laminated timber, I mentioned the ANSI APA PRG 320. That is the standard for performance-rated cross-laminated timber. And that's in the International Building Code. It's been approved through that method. And this standard covers the manufacturing, qualification, and quality assurance requirements that are needed for cross-laminated timber. So the current accepted species, SPF, is commonly used in the industry. What that means is spruce, pine, and fir. And those are the species that are approved currently for usage in cross-laminated timber. There is some exciting work going on, though, trying to integrate hardwoods into the approval process for PRG 320. And so there are some research projects that initiated out of West Virginia University and Virginia Tech several years ago. There is continued work going on at Virginia Tech testing yellow poplar panels. The folks that are working over there are Dr. Henry Casada, Dr. Daniel Heineman, Dr. Brian Bond, and Dr. Silas Adhikari. So they were able to actually construct a small demonstration project in Radford, Virginia, where folks can go and stand on this platform and view the train as it passes by. It's a great application to be able to show folks this material. But other work they've got going on is actually testing yellow poplar panels and samples from those panels through that APA process to be able to integrate that into the PRG 320. So there's a few different types of mass timber. We talked about cross-laminated timber quite a bit, but there's also nail, screw, and dowel laminated timber. I've got a picture of the nail laminated timber on the top to the right, and a picture of dowel laminated timber on the bottom. And so nail laminated timber, or NLT, has been around for about 100 years. Screw laminated timber more recently, and dowel laminated timber DLT. So NLT is a construction material that's going through a lot of redesign renaissance. It's being used more commonly now as the mass timber has gained a lot of attention in the design and engineering fields. So some of the other benefits of mass timber, either cross-laminated timber or other mass timber products, is that a lot of the prefabrication happens off-site. And so in a facility at the mill, CLT panels are cut to size, including door and window openings, using state-of-the-art computer numerical controlled routers, CNC routers. They're capable of making complex cuts with high precision. And so they can have these panels ready exactly as the plans have laid out to be able to integrate into the construction. And so the structure is erected using a crane, as the image on the right shows, lifting the panels up and into place where they're attached using connections. So talking a little bit about some of the work that we've got going on at UK with a great team of architects, engineers, and myself as a forester and wood products person. We've hosted a mass timber and Appalachia symposium back in 2021. And so we featured a panel of experts throughout the region and North America on mass timber in different respective fields. And so this virtual symposium invited architects, engineers, entrepreneurs, forest products experts, students, and community members to be able to explore the possibilities and challenges of developing advanced wood products in the Appalachian region. So we were able to talk about some of the different opportunities and some of the barriers to adopting this type of technology in Kentucky. This project was funded with UK Sustainability Challenge Grant funds. Another component of that funding we received was some compression testing of 3 different underutilized hardwood species that are common in Kentucky and the surrounding region, alongside some southern yellow pine test panels. So I've got an image on the right of one of those test panels in a press under compression, and an image below that of some of the test panels after going through compression. And so to get to this point, we had a lot of lumber that we had to then dry, plane it, chop it, and glue it to actually configure these test panels. As I mentioned, southern yellow pine test panels were constructed and tested alongside to be able to determine the strength properties between the southern yellow pine and the underutilized hardwood species that we tested. And so the main takeaway from this study was that all 3 of the hardwood species were much stronger than the pine under compression. We do have a manuscript currently under review. And so the final component of that Campus Sustainability Challenge grant is a design build for the campus sawmill. And so I've got an image here on the right as it was under construction, nearing the end phase where the sawmill would be placed shortly thereafter. And so this sawmill will be utilized by the physical plant, the arborists on campus, to be able to saw up trees from campus that are taken down due to construction or health issues, trees that may be in decline, and they can actually be salvaged in lumber that can be used by students in their class programs. And so the sawmill that we have that'll reside underneath of this structure is a Lucas slabber mill. And so it's a swing blade type of mill. And so it allows for live edge material as well as dimensional material to be sawn. And so a neat thing about this whole process with designing and building this is we were able to engage students in their architecture and engineering classes. They were able to be involved with this from the very beginning all the way through the end. And so there was design and review process to be able to make sure that this structure would meet the needs of the campus sawmill. Students built and finished the structure with assistance from the faculty, and campus wood was used in the framing. Now, this is not a mass timber structure, but it was part of integrating campus wood into some of the local wood work that we were doing with the underutilized hardwoods. And I wanted to just mention it as a neat aspect of the project. So looking forward, continued work in sustainable wood usage and forest management. Some of the reasons why this is important for Kentucky and the surrounding region to be able to integrate more markets for these underutilized hardwood species is that Kentucky is nearly 50% in woodland and forest cover, and Kentucky forests are dominated by hardwood species. Overwhelming majority of trees on the landscape are hardwoods. And so underutilized species currently existing on the landscape have a lack of markets, and there is a lack of market for low-grade lumber, which can make forest management difficult to achieve. And so CLT and mass timber products can use a lot of low-grade lumber. And as you can imagine, the surrounding Appalachian region is largely forested like Kentucky. And so this has broader implications for the whole region if hardwoods can be integrated into mass timber products. So just some additional resources if you want to learn more about mass timber, be able to look at different technical publications or attend a continuing education course. Woodworks is an excellent resource. And so they provide project assistance for folks that are interested in actually designing and building a wooden structure using mass timber. They've got lots of publications and continuing ed courses. They have galleries of completed projects, as well as they have a design and project award series that they give out each year to highlight some of these wonderful projects that are happening around the country. So with that, I'm wrapped up. Do we want to take questions now, or do we want to wait till the end?
Yeah, thank you, Pat. I appreciate that. And I'm so glad you talked about SPF, because when you said that, I was like, what? It threw me for a second. I'm going to admit it. There was a couple questions in the chat. Someone wanted to know what was the dimension weight of the panel hanging from the crane. So do you have any idea?
That's a great question. And so that panel there is roughly a 10 by 30 foot panel. And so these panels can span over 40 feet long. And so as you can imagine, they could be quite heavy. And that's where having a crane like that to be able to lift them off the back of the truck and into place, makes it a much easier effort.
And were there other hardwoods that were considered? Was another question.
So there is a lot of conversation going on kind of in the research world about these different species of underutilized hardwoods and which ones make economic sense and have enough volume out in the woods to be able to get them approved for PRG 320. And so not to get too deep down into the research world and what we're thinking about doing, but some of those species that we know that they are prolific in the woods and they are underutilized are things like your beech, your maple, sweet gum, potentially sycamore, but maybe basswood as well. There's several species like that that have limited markets, and we want to be able to develop markets to be able to achieve forest management. And so those are species that seem to have, you know, economic opportunity as well as reasonable volumes out there in the landscape.
So I'm glad you said that, because that's one thing I was wondering about, and I know some people have been wondering, is normally would you not be able to do anything with these tree species?
That's a great question, Renee, because oftentimes a stand of timber, a woodland, will be harvested, and a lot of those trees not having a market will be left there in the landscape. And so they kind of dominate that area and the light regime. So those young trees that are trying to grow up aren't getting enough light. And so they get suppressed and end up dying out. And so being able to remove those trees, we know those species will come back on the landscape. And so we're not worried about losing, you know, beech and maple by harvesting it. But our oak, if we don't harvest those, we will lose the white oak and other upland oaks. Oftentimes, if they have that maple, beech, and other dense, light species that are overtopping them. It's an excellent question.
Yeah. There was another one asking, how does the current and projected shortage of oak, hickory, and walnut fit in with marketability? And should they be planting more subspecies or just stick to oak?
Well, so I think with that question, you have your management to be able to increase those upland oaks, a variety of species that we have in Kentucky, and being able to utilize those underutilized species that we're talking about, like the beech, the maple, and sweet gum, species like that, where we can get that harvested and create space, growing space for those young oaks to be able to come up. Those will be sustained on the landscape. We have a robust bourbon industry and cooperage industry in Kentucky that really relies on that white oak, and it's so important for our wildlife and other ecological reasons as well. And so being able to keep that on the landscape, it really does take a lot of active management. And this is hopefully one way to be able to engage that by providing markets for those underutilized species.
Yeah. And, the nice thing, we can store a lot of carbon in these wood buildings, right? So carbon
Absolutely.
sequestration, if that's a concern, this really provides an avenue to kind of store away carbon for long periods of time in some of these buildings. So I'm really excited about the potential for forest management with it, Chad, really, because, we couldn't get the management done because those things couldn't pay their way out of the woods. And now this gives us maybe a potential. So I really appreciate all your work and leadership on, kind of keeping your eye on this ball for us here in Kentucky and keeping us informed of what's going on.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you very much.
Great to be with you all today. Thank you, Renee.
Thanks, Chad. All right.
So moving on to our ever popular tree of the week.
Indeed. We have an oak, Laurie, I know, but I didn't tell her what it was. So
yes, we do. And oak's a good one to do. We have at least 20 different kinds of oaks in Kentucky. So we'll continue to see more of these as I'm going through them. But today we've got a red oak, and we might not think of it as a red oak when you see it out in the landscape, but it is the willow oak. And you'll see closely when in some of the pictures why it's the red oak and how you can tell it apart from a lookalike, a willow. So here's the willow oak.
All right, I'll get her going.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the willow oak. Willow oak, Quercus vellus, is a member of the red oak group and the willow oak subgroup. It is a member of the Quercus genus, an extremely important group of hardwoods in North America, if not the entire northern hemisphere. There are more than 60 species of oak native to the United States. Willow oak is a medium to large-sized tree that grows 80 to 90 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet in diameter. It is a graceful tree with a straight, slender trunk and willow-like leaves. Trees tend to have a dense oblong to oval form, especially in the open, and like pin oak, it does not self-prune its lower branches. It is relatively fast-growing and long-lived, and it's widely used as an ornamental tree due to its attractive form, fine foliage, and dense shade-producing crown. Willow oak also provides wood products and wildlife habitat. Willow oak is found along the Atlantic coast from Pennsylvania to Georgia and west to the Gulf into Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. In Kentucky, it's found in the southern part of the state. Willow oak is commonly found along waterways and adjacent moist, rich bottomlands. It does best in well-drained soils with a pH of about 4.5 to 5.5 in full sun. It is classed as shade intolerant. In an urban setting, willow oak tolerates pollution and drought and is relatively trouble-free, providing the soils are acidic. Willow oak transplants easily and, like other oaks, is capable of regeneration through stump sprouting. Willow oak is deciduous with simple, alternately arranged leaves, as you can see in the photo. The leaves are typically 2 to 5 inches long and linear to lanceolate in shape. The margins are entire, and the tip of the leaf has a bristle tip like other red oaks. Leaves are dark green in summer and yellow to russet red in autumn. Willow oak is monoecious, meaning one house, which means a tree has both male and female flowers. The male flowers are on slender yellow-green catkins, and the female flower is in a short spike in the leaf axil. The flowers appear with the leaves or just before in very early spring, and the flowers are wind pollinated. The fruit is a very small acorn that's about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch across, and it's nearly round. It is yellow-green, ripening to tan. The acorn cap is thin and shaped like a saucer, and it only covers about 1/4 of the acorn. Acorns mature in late summer to early fall of their second season. The seeds are dispersed by wildlife and gravity and germinate the following spring. Trees begin producing acorns around 20 years of age and produce good seed crops almost every year. The bark on willow oak is smooth and gray on young stems, but as the tree ages, the bark gets darker and forms irregular rough ridges and furrows. The wood of willow oak shares many of the same traits as its relative, the northern red oak. It is light to medium reddish brown in color, but there can be a bit of variation in that color. It is hard and strong and fairly coarse-grained, and it has medium to large pores. It has moderate decay resistance, which is typical of red oaks as compared to the much more decay-resistant white oaks. We know that from the tiny acorn a mighty oak tree grows, and according to the National Wildlife Federation, oaks are one of the top 10 trees for wildlife because they help wildlife grow. Oaks serve as a host tree for more than 500 different lepidopteran larvae, including the imperial moth, the dagger moth, hair streaks, and dusky wings. The consistent and abundant acorn crop of willow oak is an important food source for waterfowl, wild turkey, red-headed and red-bellied woodpeckers, blue jays, flickers, grackles, deer, squirrel, and other small rodents. Willow oak is used for cabinetry, furniture, interior trim, flooring, and veneer, much like other red oak. It is also used for pulp and paper production. Willow oak is widely used as a large shade tree and ornamental due to its rapid growth, hardiness, and its fine texture. It is a large tree and should be matched with the planting site. The national champion willow oak as of 2021 is in Chesapeake, Virginia. It is 308 inches in circumference, 115 feet tall, with a 125-foot crown spread. The Kentucky champion willow oak is in Knox County, and it's 247 inches in circumference, 109 feet tall, with a 100-foot crown spread. If you'd like to know more about champion trees, check out American Forest National Champion Trees or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about willow oak. The common name willow comes from the resemblance of the leaves of those of the willow tree. A quick ID tip to know if you're looking at a true willow or a willow oak is to check the tip of the leaf for the common red oak characteristic of a bristle tip, as you can see in the photo. The oak was formally recognized as the national tree of the United States in 2004, and that's all oaks. Blue jays transport and cache acorns up to several miles from the parent tree, and they seem to prefer the small to medium-sized acorns like that of the willow oak. Willow oak's scientific name Quercus is the Latin name for oak, and phellos is from Greek and means corky bark or bark with corky ridges. I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodland, park, or neighborhood and enjoy the wonderful trees such as the willow oak.
Well, Lori, thank you so much for doing that presentation, because I would not have thought that was an oak. That's not your typical oak leaf that you see. And
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of those that it is in that willow vein. So it looks at subgroup, and it doesn't, you look at it and you think, oh, that's a willow tree, until you see the acorns. And then you go, oh, this is a funny willow tree. But it's widely planted. And I know here on campus, we have a lot of willow oak around here.
I was going to say, Lori, one of my favorite places on campus is, not too far from the library is a nice alley of willow oaks. And it's really long, and there's hundreds of willow oaks. So if you're ever near campus and near the library, there's a beautiful group of willow oaks you can check out.
Absolutely.
Something very peaceful, because I've been through there too, and you can hear it when the wind is blowing through the trees, and you're just kind of like,
it's nice. So
you said this is part of red oaks, right?
Right. It is a red oak.
How many red oak do we have in Kentucky?
In Kentucky, I think we have about 13 different kinds of red oaks here. So we have lots of red oaks. Now, it's not willow oaks naturally, not hugely abundant here, but it is, like I said, it is widely planted. In part because it is an attractive tree and it's quick, it has rapid growth. So
Thanks again for joining.
Love the segments, Laurie. Keep them coming. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
You know, weather-wise, Billy, we have been hit with tornadoes. Kentucky's been hit with snow. I mean, overabundance of a lot of different weather types.
Yeah, and Renee, they're going to keep coming, right? So, we have to be prepared for those. Unfortunately, we have Dr. Jacob Muller with us today. Jacob, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. Great to be here.
You're taking the lead for our unit here on the storm damage information and trying to help folks kind of deal with that. And we're so glad to have you with us today, kind of sharing some of that work.
Yeah. Thanks, Billy. Yeah, it's an important topic. It's one that affects most woodland owners in one way or another. And we've got plenty of resources here to help you deal with storm damage, with other damaging agents that will affect your woodland. And so obviously there's a couple that are kind of on the front of our mind as we see these pictures from Western Kentucky and the tornado damages last December. And I'll touch on that and some other resources for you as a woodland owner to help manage your woodlands when you're facing some of these challenges. So, okay, hopefully you can all see that.
You're good.
Yes.
All right. So again, today I'm going to be talking about woodland storm damage and some resources. And you'll see down in the bottom right-hand corner there, we have a website, and I'll show that again here at the end of the presentation today. Oops. All right, so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the tornadoes that we experienced here in Kentucky. They actually call this the quad state tornado because it touched in 4 different states, but a lot of that damage we saw here in Kentucky and primarily over in Western Kentucky. And there's actually 2 long track tornadoes that touched down basically parallel to each other on that terrible evening on December 10th. And so you can see a map here, and there's been images that have been coming out recently, primarily through NASA. And you can see actually from space the tornado path that it took. And so you see that line there, I highlighted it, or at least pointed to it with those arrows. And so you can see, especially when it goes through those wooded areas, a pretty distinct line, right? All that is timber damage, right? That is areas that the tornado passed over and generally causing quite severe damage. Over here in this part of the state, a lot of that is farmland, right? And so there's areas with lots of fields mixed with woodlands. And so a lot of farmers, or a lot of landowners rather, experienced some level of damage if they were unfortunate to be in the path of that tornado. There's also some new technologies coming out from NASA. This is NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory out at Caltech in California, and they're developing models to assess damage, so damage severity. And you can see this is from Bowling Green. So that was that second tornado that came up in Kentucky, just south of the Mayfield quad state tornado. And in this image, you can see some of that severity as it went through Bowling Green. NASA is working on a number of these models, and the hope is that we can work together to help assess some of the woodland damage, so the wooded areas that were damaged, and assess the severity similar to these more urban or community areas that were affected. And that's kind of the challenge right now that we're facing, is trying to understand the extent of the damage and how many acres were affected. And we're working on that as we speak. So what does the storm damage look like? Right? It depends. Right? If you were, again, unfortunate to be right in the path when that tornado was a mile wide, you could be facing some very severe damage. Right? Some areas that might not be salvageable. Right? There might not be much left, or if there is, it's very poor quality wood. Other times, depending on if you're on the periphery of those storms, at least if we're talking about tornadoes as a damaging agent, there'll be some mixed severity of that damage, right? And so you can see in this photo, and this is a photo taken from Western Kentucky, one area of the road here on the left-hand side was relatively untouched, where on the right-hand side, there was quite substantial damage, right? And so it's not evenly displaced. Oftentimes woodland owners will experience a range of conditions. Some areas of their woodland, they might be able to get in and manage much more easily than some other areas that are really difficult and dangerous to get into at this point. And we'll talk about some of that here today and some options that you might have in assessing those woodlands. So again, here's an area that has some trees. You can notice in the foreground and in the back, some trees that have fallen over. There's some branches that have broken. Other stems are relatively undamaged. And so here, there's potential opportunities to come in, salvage some of that wood or that timber that's been damaged by different storms. Here is another difficult situation where we have lots of storm debris housing that's mixed in, creating very dangerous conditions, and it's difficult to get logging equipment and other equipment into these woodlands. And so these things take time, right? You'll notice that branch up here in the left hand corner, this is a very dangerous area, right? It's difficult to get in. It's difficult for a forester to get in and truly assess that. And these things take time. The cleanup is going to be extensive, and it's going to take time, and patience is really going to be your best friend dealing with if you are one of the more severely hit areas. Right? But we have a number of resources. And oftentimes when we see damaged trees, whether it's through ice damage, which we have a lot of resources that we've developed, or tornado damage, we've got some forthcoming publications and other information based more specifically on tornado damage. But regardless, we see kind of common types of damage, right? And we'll kind of walk through these different levels of damage in the woodland and what some of your options might be. But again, a lot of times we're going to see a mix of these levels of severity with the damage. But first, it's important to consider a few things, right? And safety is always your first concern. And anytime we head out, whether it's after a major snowstorm or ice storm or a tornado, the woods can be a very dangerous place, right? And so safety is always your first concern, and it should be always the first thing that you think about before even thinking about venturing out into the woodlands. Right? Next thing to consider is what trees can be cut, what trees to leave, where some of that value may exist in your woodland. For some of those who have had significant loss in timber value, there are some options when you file your taxes to claim casualty losses. We'll touch on that. Depending on the type of storm, following an ice storm, when there's a lot of branches, what we call ladder fuels, and sources of fuel for fires, there can potentially be increased wildfire risk following some of these storms, and that's something to be important, or something that we should consider. I'm not terribly concerned about wildfire after these tornadoes, but it's always something that we should consider, and consider whether we should be reducing some of that fuel as part of our management. Right. And lastly, there's resources. There's lots of resources available. We have resources here at UK and a number of other, the Kentucky Consulting Foresters, KDF, the Kentucky Division of Forestry, others, the NRCS, that has programs that can help offset some of the costs towards managing after some of these disturbances. But again, safety first. And so we'll touch on some of those resources and some tips real quick. Right. So tip number one, it's always important to have PPE, right? Personal protective equipment. That's a hard hat, oftentimes some sort of eye protection. And if you're doing any felling of trees or bucking up, to have proper chainsaw equipment, chaps, and a face guard. I mean, it's important that we stay out of the woods when it's windy, right? You can see in this photo here, there's this branch that's hanging up, right? It broke off and it got caught up in the canopy. This is what we call a widowmaker, right? This is a term that's been used frequently for a long time because it has the potential to severely injure you or even kill you, because there's a lot of mass, a lot of weight with some of these logs, these branches that are hung up in the trees. You get a windy condition that can knock this branch out. It's incredibly dangerous. So when we see these widowmakers or other trees that have potential of falling or dropping branches, we can flag those and know that we should stay clear of those. And along those lines, get dangerous trees away from roads and trails that are going to be frequently used. So that's kind of the first priority in removing any trees. Right? Do not just go out and start cutting bent or pinned trees, because there can be a lot of tension in those bent trees. Right? We call those spring pulls. When you cut a tree, all of a sudden that tension is released and it can fly up and either fling branches or fall over in the other direction. And it's important that we're aware of those. Right? And I mentioned this before, those widowmakers, always looking up, being very aware of our situation and where we're going. Right. And then lastly, do not fell lodged trees with a chainsaw. And this again kind of relates to that tension. We have a number of resources that I mentioned, more specifically focused on ice damage, but a lot of these different conditions that we see in the woodlands, we could relate to tornado damage that we see. We're often seeing similar types damage, especially kind of on the edges of that tornado's path. If we're looking right in the middle of that tornado when it was at its most severe, I think it was an EF4 level of tornado, there might not be a whole lot of salvageable material directly in that path, but we are going to see areas along the tornado's path that have been damaged, that some of these resources and this safety in the woods resource is particularly helpful when we venture out into our woods. And so what trees should we think about removing? Right? And it depends. Going back to these figures, some trees are acceptable growing stock to continue on. Others are unacceptable at this point and don't serve at least any timber value or economic value. They could potentially serve other benefits or values related to wildlife, and that's something that you will need to work with the forester to think about. But if there's any hazardous trees, it's generally best to remove those. Again, we have a number of resources on our website related to some of these decision-making guides in evaluating the damage that we can borrow from these ice damage and apply that to some of those tornado, at least until we get some of the more specific, the tornado specific information out to you. Right, and so we have a main stem break, a major branch break, the bent trees, the down trees, trees that have greater than 50% crown loss, and those that have less than. And these matter because they help guide us on whether those trees will recover that next growing season and be acceptable and continue to grow and be a positive component to our woodland. Right? When we get a major stem breakage, like we see here in this photo, generally that tree is it would be best to remove that. There are hazards associated with this tree, and it's not going to be gaining any value as it stands. Major branch breakages, right here, when we see a major branch broken off, this can introduce rot, decay, and other problems in the tree, and it may be a tree that you want to work with a forester or a consultant to think about removing, as this tree may not be an acceptable growing stock in your woodland. Right, bent trees, again, these aren't necessarily terrible trees, but as far as timber value, it's generally best to remove those as we're losing value. And some trees may recover or bounce back, but a lot of times, if that's bent at least to a kind of a horizontal angle there, it would be difficult to bounce back after that. Obviously, down trees, sometimes there's a lot of value left in these trees that have fallen over, right? We can see a number of logs that are contained within this tree. And then we go back to the safety of felling a tree, especially one that's hung up in other trees. I would recommend having professionals work with you to get those. Severe crown loss. Right? We often say if it's experienced over 50% crown loss, such as this tree, it's going to have a difficult time recovering and being healthy into the future. If you have less than 50%, there's a scale there, or kind of a spectrum depending on the species and whether that tree will bounce back and be an acceptable growing stock or component. Right, and this is more related to the low and moderate crown loss, such as we see in this tree. This tree will likely be okay. Depending on our management objectives, we may choose to keep this tree in our woodlands. So there's a range of conditions that we see following these, and it's important that we work with professionals to help assess any value that may be lost. And so what if we've lost a lot of value, right? If you were unfortunate enough to be in that path, or at least your woodland was, and I've spoken with quite a few woodland owners that have lost thousands of dollars worth of timber, it's a really difficult, it's a really sad thing. I have a lot of compassion for those folks, but there are some things to help, right? Nothing's gonna immediately grow back your woodland, right? Or give you the exact amount of loss that you experienced through this damage, but there are options, right? There are timber tax deduction from casualty loss that you can file with your taxes and work with an appraiser to get the value of what was lost, and then include that in your tax returns as an economic loss, right? Or a casualty loss. Right? And so it's important to work with a forester someone who can appraise the loss so that you can get a numerical value of how much was potentially lost, right? And this is important too, because this past tornado storm was declared a federal emergency, and that opens up a lot more resources to claim these tax losses. And so if you've experienced a lot of loss or know someone who has, there are some options, including some NRCS funding that can help remove some of this wood. There's even funding to help replant your woodlands once you get this cleared out and managed. And it's a great time, if you don't already have a management plan, to work with a forester to start a management plan and get rolling towards recovery, right? And contact a forester, right? This is, I would argue this is an important step. They've got the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to help you be safe, to help you get any sort of salvageable material out of your woodlands. Yeah. And then I'll just end on this. This is our website. We've got some resources you can see in this tab. The resources right next to contact us, where we have a number of publications and ways to contact us and speak with a specialist, or we can help connect you with some of those resources. And it's kytimberdamage.net or kytimberdamage.ca.uky.edu. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Well, thank you so much for that. We greatly appreciate it. And, you know, Jacob, how long after this storm will it take before the woods will start to bounce back?
It's tough to put a discrete number on that. A lot of that depends on so many factors, the severity. Sometimes, and Ellen, Dr. Crocker could speak to this, when we get in and manage after these storms, there's a potential for introducing other invasive plants, and that creates a whole nother layer of issues. And that's why I say now is the perfect time to get a management plan if you don't already have one for your woodlands. We can plan for those things, or you can work with a forester to plan for any of those forest health issues that might be introduced following this. But as far as a time frame, it takes a while, right? We think about things kind of on our human time scale, and forests don't quite grow that time scale, right? They take a while to develop. And so when something like this happens, some resources can be stretched thin, so it might take a little bit longer to get a professional out there, but I encourage you to be patient. There is hope, and you will be able to recover, but it can take some time. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. You know, and as our hearts continue to break for all those folks in Western Kentucky, you know, at least we're trying to provide some information, some resource, some guidance so that they can, you know, make their woods as healthy as possible. So Jacob, thank you, and the whole team that's been working on this stuff. It's needed and appreciated.
Definitely.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah. You know, Renee, I would add real quickly, we do have something that kind of goes along with what Jacob was talking about. We have a series coming up, a webinar series on forest related taxes, and I'll show a quick little slide of that. Just let you know what we got going on. So coming up, starting on January 18th, which is this coming Tuesday, we're going to start every Tuesday. We're going to have a series of webinars, and these webinars are going to last about an hour or so, but they'll be on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern time, and we're going to be covering a number of topics. We've assembled a team of forestry tax related experts from across the country. This is part of our ongoing regional webinar series, where we're working with our sister forestry extension units across the South and the region as well. So this is a great opportunity to get a lot of information. These webinars are free, but you do have to register for them in advance to watch them live. We will have the recording coming available, but real briefly, we're going to start off on Tuesday the 18th with kind of an overview of forestry taxes, how tax law intersects with forests and forest management. Then we're going to be talking about the basics of timber basis. So basis is basically your investment in that property, and that has serious implications on when it comes to treating taxes. So it's important to understand that. We're also going to cover in a webinar how you handle expenses and deductions related to woodlands and their management. Believe it or not, there are some opportunities to make some deductions from that, and your basis can come into that play as well. We're also going to have a webinar on talking about how you deal with income and sales taxes related to timber sales, and how to kind of maximize the tax situation in that regard. And then one that's probably most important to those folks in Western Kentucky right now, we're going to have some of the folks that are very knowledgeable about the casualty loss issues that come up related to some of these severe weather events. So we're going to be talking about coping with loss and some of those programs and how you can navigate them to try to get some relief for some of the damage that was received. So we encourage you, these are free, open to the public, and it's a great way to get a lot of great information from some real experts from all over the United States. So hopefully people can check this out, Renee, and they'll get some good information from it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to provide a lot of good information, especially for some of those people in Western Kentucky, for sure, to help with that. We're at the end of our show, but next week we're going to talk about forested stream buffers. We're going to have Dr. Amanda Gumbert talking about that, and Megan Buelen's going to be on again talking about growing mushrooms. So if you ever wanted to know about how to grow mushrooms, she's going to give a brief introduction on how to do that, and also we'll have Lori Thomas with our tree of the week. So
it's a great show. So
great show, another one like we always say. So make sure to join us, and if you ever want to watch any of our past shows, you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com, and they're all listed there.
Everybody take care.
All right. Until then, we'll see you next week at 11 o'clock. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.